Hi, this is James Melendez, James the Wine Guy, here to talk about, of all things today, Prohibition. Now, I have these props up here to help me think about this, this is a Frappato from Sicily and a Carignan from Dry Creek Valley. And really, for me, the reason I rethought about this, I've been thinking about this for quite some time, was I was at a rare wine varietal tasting, and it really called out to my attention in terms of why we have so very few rare varietals in the United States, and also how difficult it is to bring them in terms of at least being cleared through USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, in terms of its quarantine period and so forth. And I think that if Prohibition never happened, there would have been a very different circumstance that we live through today. Now, despite all the issues, and when you think of Ken Burns' special, this three-part series, and leaving that to the part 3, there could have been 4, 5, and 6, because that was only part of the story. The other part of the story was all these laws that were created, because in 1933, with the repeal of Prohibition, came the creation of all these laws, and they could be governed by a state as they deemed necessary. As it went down to not just city, county, but special zones within a particular, maybe municipality, for example. So that's why you have so many laws that are across the U.S., and really, in many ways, they are so outmoded today. Really, there's no way of changing that unless there's another maybe a amendment to the 21st Amendment that really repeals that, which is more of maybe a centralized focus, which is U.S. federal government versus just each single state and every other government underneath that, creating wine and beer and spirits laws, which are quite numerous. So watching this program on PBS, this other news program, and realizing that there are about 40,000 alcohol beverage control laws. As a former wine marketing professional, I was really familiar with that. I lived through that. I know exactly when they talk about the obtuseness and the difficulty, and things are just so obscure that I think if most people knew that, they would probably have a lot of these laws repealed, because they are really prohibiting the enjoyment of wine. And despite it all, you have a approximately $32 billion wine market in the United States. Now, that's despite how difficult it is to import, how difficult it is to distribute, how it is to cross state lines, how many strange and obtuse laws there are for maybe just on-premise versus off-premise, how many laws really have gone into effect of creating a culture that is not exactly, I think, in many ways, that it could have been. Now, this is an article that I wrote on my website, and I think that you would have had fewer acres that were pulled out. You would have more old vines. You'd have a greater varietal exposure and experience. And also, I think the United States and certain areas in the United States have a lot of wine regions that could definitely support maybe a Frappato, maybe a whole bunch of other varietals that are really obscure that could have been planted here. Now, I think that's just really a slower way of getting there, in terms of at least, there are protocols to bring in vines from across the planet, and vice versa. There are also export from the United States vines to other places in the world. But I think that expression would have happened much sooner. I also think you would have a larger wine market. You would have a much more sense of having a glass of wine with each meal, including lunchtime. Some days, and it depends where you are in the United States, it's kind of like one of those strange things that very few people do enjoy, and that's probably because a lot of workplaces prohibit that. Some places in Europe, or many places in Europe, you go to a cafeteria, company-run cafeteria, and you have a glass of wine, and that's perfectly okay. Now, I also think that the whole subject matter that started my thinking on this, which was esoterica. Esoterica, those rare wine varietals, wouldn't be so esoteric, because I think more people would be experiencing a greater sense of the more obscure wine varietals, and maybe you would even have a greater planting across the planet for that. So I think there's so many things that come about from this, and I think you have a different definition of international varietal. I think that would really, I think it's going to happen in the future, where not just French varietals have that international moniker, but I think it's going to go across, say, Spain or Italy or other places around the planet. The international grape set is much larger. So I think when you think of this, it's just amazing. I go to Napa all the time, and I overheard a conversation between a consumer and the wine tasting room employee, and it goes something like this. I want to have these shipped to my home in Kansas. And the wine tasting employee says, "Oh, well, no, we can't do that." And the consumer says, well, that other winery that I went to just before this actually sent it to my house in Kansas. Well, I'm sorry, sir, we can't do that. And the consumer finally says, knowing that they probably faced this before, okay, ship to my office in Missouri. So you have all these people trying to really climb through and get through something that it shouldn't be as difficult as it is. And this happens, this is not just an uncommon occurrence, this happens all the time. So if you want to read more about this, please go to jamesthewineguy.com. Please subscribe to my videos on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Vimeo, Google+, and Pinterest. Salud.